super exciting. Based on all of the fan requests that have come in, specifically on a show about banking, our first official panel on banking that's going to happen right now, called the Big Bank Breakdown, is starting right soon. I've got some fantastic guests here with me. We're going to break down the power hierarchy down to what we can do from an individual and local perspective on our money, on our activism, and how we can basically make our money and our power work for us, for the planet, for each other, rather than for the large banks who get globs of it, have a lot of political support, and pay a lot of fines to just go away and do what they're doing again anyway. So with that, I just want to introduce our fantastic panel here. We've got Sean Stone, who is an amazing actor and activist and involved in so many important causes that we're going to be talking about. Trinity Tran, who is here from Public Banking Initiative in LA, as well as the Divesting LA Initiative, and David Dayan, who is the executive editor at American Prospect and author of a fantastic book called Chain of Title, which gets into the guts of how individuals are impacted by the mortgage crisis still to this day. So thank you guys for joining, and thanks to all the fans who've asked for this to happen. So here we go. We have for you 5 fast financial facts. And what's important about these facts is that a lot of times the news doesn't actually, on the mainstream, connect the dots between what's happening from where the power is in our money flow, in our financial system, to what it's actually doing, and how we can change that. So this is the news. This is the news right now that we've selected some highlights for and that we're going to talk about. And they connect. So we're going through this high to low, or where the power is to where it should go, perspective of our monetary system, of our banking system, of the current state of the financial world and where we need to be. So the first is something that happened this week. Which is that the Fed had one of their monthly meetings. The Federal Reserve Bank got together, as they do every month, and they decide on what's going to happen with interest rates. What do interest rates do? They show us the cost of money to banks, for which it's always very cheap, and then how we ultimately wind up paying interest on things like credit cards and student loans and so forth. So the S&P 500, the stock market, had a fantastic day after the Fed basically said we're going to potentially keep rates even lower than where they are at some point in the very near future. And what's interesting about this headline, and if we could just bring it up again, S&P 500 carves out the first intraday record since May 1, and this is the important part of that fact, as the Fed fuels a stock market rally. The Federal Reserve feeds the stock market. The Federal Reserve does not feed the actual real people of this world. It has the power to create money. It has the power to decide where that money goes. And this little headline has a lot packed into it because it talks about where the benefit really is. So I want to open it up to the panel so we can talk about that fact and your perspective on that. So Sean, if you'd like to kind of frame that for us from a power perspective.
From a power perspective, yeah, what you touched upon certainly is this notion that we have, the banks essentially were loosening the interest, the Fed was loosening the interest rate so that we can fuel the stock market rise. In doing a documentary called Century of War, which I interviewed you for, Naomi, and was a lot of fun to work on, but it was very dismal as far as seeing the real impact of what the American economy looks like. We talk about the country being the strongest in the world and the economy being so strong, and then you go to places like Detroit, like Baltimore, even in Los Angeles right here, as we know, there's this complete striation between wealth and poverty. And actually, ironically, most people really are living in debt. It's just a question of those that actually have access to more credit lines, that actually have more assets, as opposed to those that are completely squeezed. As we know, majority of people in this country are completely squeezed with very little to no assets. And so they're just living as debt slaves. And when talking to one young man in Detroit, one of the great things that he quoted from the documentary was saying, look, people like myself, a young black man from Detroit, I don't invest in Wall Street. No one I know invests in Wall Street. Why? We have no relationship with how to deal with these Wall Street companies. We don't really know how to read this. What we know are what we buy. So if we could basically diversify and create more local markets, people like Catherine Austin Fitts advocating for this, how can we basically go back to the idea of more local-based markets so that we can figure out who we're exchanging with? And essentially, if we're going to shop at certain locations and basically we're choosing to interact economically with certain people and companies, and thanks to networking, internet, and all this is getting much easier, and cryptos are making this more facile. Essentially, we need to figure out ways of giving people access to wealth who are not part of this upper class that can afford to invest and follow the trends of the Wall Street Journal and whatnot of where to invest, but the real people who are working, just saying, look, I go down the street, and I like Whole Foods, but right now investing in Whole Foods, as we know at this point, is not really going to make you a fortune. It was only getting in the beginning. So how can we make markets and things like this growing, burgeoning from the lower class perspective, from the mom and pop perspective? How can we do that? That's one way of framing this discussion.
Yeah, and that's a shift. The Federal Reserve has given 21, and other central banks has given $21 trillion of subsidy. I call it subsidy, they call it help, to the financial system as it extends to itself today, to CEOs of large financial institutions, to derivatives transactions, to speculation in the financial assets in the market, and so forth. $21 trillion is a lot of money created from nowhere. The big banks at the height of the financial crisis screwed over a lot of people. And a lot of economies. And we are still feeling the effects of that. As you say, local communities are, individuals are, and it's like, what do you do? They've only paid $160 billion worth of fines. I say only because if you're getting $21 trillion of effectively free or low cost money, paying $160 billion over 10 years really doesn't make that much of a difference. And that's something where the financial revolution that we're embarking on right now needs to address. Now, I know, Trinity, you've basically been involved for a number of years in the financial revolution, public banking, divesting money, putting in the right places. How did you come to that?
Well, I mean, once you realize the widespread devastation and how unsustainable the private model is, it becomes a moral duty to really stand up and fight for it and wrest power away from the banks and put it in the hands of the people. And that's what, we started with Divest LA by targeting Wells Fargo, inspired by what was happening at Standing Rock. And we took shifted the front lines from Standing Rock to LA City Council and pushed the City Council to divest from Wells Fargo, which was a bank that the city primarily banked with, a bank with a long laundry list of crimes against the people. And we held the city to the fiduciary duty to protect the taxpayers of Los Angeles. So within 9 months, we levied a very hard-hitting campaign and developed a movement around what a technical implementation of divestment would look like. And within 4 months, we got the city of Los Angeles to divest $40 million of holdings from Wells Fargo. 6 months later, through very targeted legislative advocacy, we got the city to debundle 800 Wells Fargo accounts and disqualify Wells Fargo because of their substandard Community Reinvestment Act rating. But the successes of the divestment movement wasn't as clear cut, because when you look at the scope and scale of the cities the size of Los Angeles, to divest from Wells Fargo and move that money to a socially environmentally responsible bank, we knew that there were limited options, and that at the end of the day there would be only a handful of big banking players that would be capable of handling the financial needs of the size of Los Angeles, and that the big banking players were the U.S. Bank, Citibank, Union Bank, JP Morgan Chase, and Bank of America. And most, if not all of those banks have been handed violations and civil penalties from the Department of Justice. So we knew we had to fight for another alternative.
Right, and David, you have covered this story of how individuals have been impacted by and are still impacted by the power that these banks have over their mortgages, over their borrowing, over their funding, and you're still ongoing in a lot of the work that you're doing and in a lot of these cases, right?
Yeah. So I mean, certainly we still see mortgage abuse out there in the public. We still have seen a number of fines that have been paid for conduct that happened post-crisis. I mean, there's sort of a popular theory that all of this is residue from the housing bubble, which was like sort of a big collective mistake, I guess. But certainly the stuff with respect to Wells Fargo, force-placed insurance, putting junk insurance onto people's accounts when they purchase a car, the fake account scandal where they were cross-selling, trying to increase the amount of accounts on somebody's, in somebody's name, and fabricating documents for that. We've seen this go over in a number of ways, but we also have to sort of broaden our perspective in thinking about what is Wall Street, right? What are we talking about there? When you talk about that number, the new high for the S&P. I mean, we know that about 10% of the population owns 84% of the stocks. And it's actually even tighter than that when you know that index funds are now a multi-trillion-dollar business. There's a guy named John Coates at Harvard Business School that talks about the problem of 12, that in the future, it'll essentially be 12 people that own effectively all of these stocks. And that includes the asset managers. And that concentration of power is affecting the Fed's actions. So it's a feedback loop between these large asset management companies like Vanguard, like BlackRock, and so forth, and the Federal Reserve itself in terms of their decision making. And we become so reliant on this rate structure and whether we're going to raise and lower rates rather than building a productive economy and the rise and fall of the stock market being based on that. It's all just sort of air. Go ahead.
And one of the things too, even the savings rates that we get if we have $10 to $500 to whatever in a bank right now, these banks have gotten all this money, right? And they're giving effectively 0% interest or really close to it, the big banks on people's savings accounts.
And the rates have raised from a zero interest rate policy to now I think we're at what, 2%, something like that.
Yeah, we're between two and a quarter, two and a half.
2.25 and 2.5, and those interest rates have really not budged. For the people.
Right. And I mean, they have budged a little bit for the banks that ironically don't get as much help from the Fed. So some of the online banks, some of the new models that we have out there that effectively are giving about 10 to 12 to 15 times interest rate on savings for people who are giving them their money and not charging fees and not charging ATM fees. So they're basically allowing people to get more back from the money that they have as opposed to taking it for themselves. And this is something that, when we talk also about the debt, that, Sean, you brought this out and it was one of our 5 facts. The debt in this country right now is at all-time highs. Consumer debt, across housing, across autos, across, of course, student loans, all-time highs. And that's when supposedly we're in a recovery. Like, what's that about?
What's a permanent debt? I mean, that's the thrust of what they wanted to create. And I say they in a loose sense of, the oligarchs. I would say the oligarch, Princeton did a study saying we basically are an oligarchy at this point. So, it's not, I don't know how much of it was intentional and how much of it is just an aspect of what is banking sense, right? We talked in the documentary, Nomi, you mentioned Henry Ford and like the notion of, despite all Ford's flaws, the business model, businessman's business model, and I can resonate this, working in Hollywood in the business, like we want people to have money in their pocket because we want them to be able to buy goods, right? So every businessman wants to see workers making good wages. Like it doesn't make sense to have a system where you basically are putting people into complete slavery unless you have a banking debt system where it says, I don't care if you have a wage or a credit card. So basically it's like, what happened really from the 70s forth, when you look at the blue collar economics of anything to do with a union job, right? Where you're paying now, let's say a union job pays, let's say $30 an hour. And then you say, well, we're slashing the union jobs. We're replacing them with service sector jobs that are paying, let's say at most half of that. Sometimes, as we know, $10 or less an hour, right? In many states, it's like the hourly wage is like $5-6. In southern states, I've been to friends that work there, and the waitresses, they're getting $5 an hour kind of thing. So they're basically living on what? On credit cards. So it's not the businessman's model, because the businessman's model is saying, look, I want you to have money so you can buy my goods, so you can enjoy the economy, so you can be part of the economy. It's the banker's mentality, which is to say, I don't care as long as you're just making enough to pay off the interest and keeping this system of debt going until it all comes crashing down, which is a question of just not if, but when, I believe.
Right, and in terms of the solutions, you talk about individuals who are indebted, who haven't had a choice but to be indebted because of the wage structure, because of the financial structure, because of the fact that banks don't work as they are right now, the big ones, for the people. They don't work for the economy, they don't work for the people. They're getting an effective free ride from the Fed, from the policies that we have today, and people are upset. And we need to do something. This is all about how do we create a financial evolution and revolution to basically get out of that and create something new, and create it through technology, create it through better savings accounts, create it through better ways of investing our money in things and in the world in a way that actually provides fruit to more people and not to Jamie Dimon, who's running JP Morgan Chase and makes like multiple millions of dollars like a year. So that's what we really want to do. And Trinity, like again, you've basically been at some of the forefront of seeing how people are changing by getting active behind some of these movements, not just, I mean, in their own lives, as well as in the movement itself.
Exactly. I mean, stemming from the divestment movement, once we realized that there wasn't a real ethical alternative to other Wall Street banks, we knew we had to create a new system, and that the ultimate form of divestment was to divest from Wall Street altogether. And so you're moving from a system that's private-based, that's based on extraction, where profit and resources are siphoned away from our communities, to a public model where profit and resources actually belong to the community and gets reinvested back into the community. So that then launched the Public Bank LA campaign, which is now California Public Banking Alliance, where we're pushing for a model that whereas billions of our tax dollars now sit in Wall Street banks, earn next to zero in interest, and then gets leveraged to finance industries that actually harm our communities. So instead of redirecting the flow towards Wall Street, we're redirecting it back into our communities by creating a publicly owned system. Right. And a public bank, essentially, it's a financial institution that's owned by a public entity, a city, a county, a state, or a JPA. The deposit base are the tax revenues and the fees that our city accrues. It has a social benefit purpose. All of its lending activities are meant to strengthen the local economy. So billions are now redirected, being able to get reinvested back into our society to fund and address local pressing needs like affordable housing and green energy, all of the things we need but don't have money for. Public banking provides the solution.
Yeah, and also a lot of the solutions that are out there, like, you know, we've been thankful to have Aspiration, for example, sponsoring this show and your questions. And the reality is, if we as people can not just complain, but actually can act to change, not just with what we say, not just with what we do in the streets, not just with petitions, but all of that, and actually moving our money into places where it works for us, it works for our communities, it works for localities, it works for the environment, it works for how we combine in this world as individuals. So it doesn't float, you know, into the top. It actually sustains and creates a foundation at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, essentially what you're saying is that people have a vote, and the vote can be put forward with their money. That it's not just every 2 years we kind of figure out what side and what representative we want to represent us in Washington. Is that people have a vote every day to figure out, you know, how am I going to support the system that I want to see? Am I going to put my money in a system, a financialized system that is going to send it around the world and do things that I don't respect? Or am I going to put it into a local system? That's what I really like about the public banking idea, is this idea of circulating money locally. I mean, we have this sort of terrible regional inequality problem right now where, you know, the main streets have been decimated. You have Walmart as the big store in various cities, or maybe they're using Amazon or something, and the money doesn't get circulated locally to that small businessman, that small project. With a public bank, the local tax dollars are being used to supplement local needs. And it creates a really positive feedback loop and could spur entrepreneurship and local business and things that I think ultimately are part of the American character and what we actually want to see in our country.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, no, I mean, it speaks to what I think the millennial generation and younger are looking towards, which is to say, like, why is it that, you know, when I'm putting money into the pockets of big corporations, we've already seen what happened. We've already seen that the Swiss study from 2012 where 1,000 corporations have like 40% of the world's assets in their control. We've seen what that model created, right? It created money going up and basically saying, well, it's not coming back to me. Why is it that we don't have this mentality just as humans of saying, I want to put money into my friends' pockets. I want to put money into the people that I actually know and trust, not just because of, personally, it could be networks, but the idea of integrity, like where is integrity in our economic system? Because for so long we've been under this illusion, this spell that money can buy anything. And it's like, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world are great examples basically of like just the ugliness of business practices and behaviors that can basically just say, well, I have the money and the illusion of success, so people want to invest with me and I can get away with criminal behavior. He's just one of many people like this who behave this way in business, and most of which will never go down because, unless Jamie Dimon gets charged with Me Too, it's like people, but the point being that it's like, it's more than sexual behavior, it's literally their business behavior and their lack of integrity. And so why are we not going towards this notion of, hey, we want to work and create communities? I mean, it can be done with cryptos. It can be done with public banking. It can be done at community levels, going back to organic farmers and local farmers. I mean, it can be done step by step with who we choose in a momentary basis of where you're going to put our money, and why are we not going to emphasize those which are going to give back to the community. That speaks so much more as a company than the one that's basically just saying we're going to profit off of you and make billions, and you should be thankful that we exist. It's like, no, you should be thankful that we exist. We are the basis. We, the humans that create your pyramid structure. If we walk away from it, your pyramid collapses.
Well, that's an important point, because at the end of the day, we have the power of where we put our money. And we also need to have an easy way to actually utilize that money. So if you're not necessarily doing something like running your own local business or being out in the streets or whatever it is, which you can also do, like how do we find places where we can aggregate our money in a manner where it takes it away from Jamie Dimon? I personally think Jamie Dimon's like a deviant human, right? And not only that, his bank, JP Morgan Chase, was charged with a felony. And so, one of the things that we need to do is understand that we don't give our money, we don't want to give our money to people who commit felonies against us. Wells Fargo stole money from its customers. We need to find alternatives, whether it's public, whether it's, setting up an account right now with Aspiration, which by the way, I did. I just want to point out that a few days ago, I'm riding a train from somewhere to somewhere, and I literally took 3 minutes. That's 3 minutes. That actually was 2 minutes and 58 seconds. I'm actually rounding up just for conservative purposes here, in case you need to like sneeze or whatever while you're doing this, but to open an Aspiration account. And I did, and I funded it. And I had all sorts of like sort of positive affirmations along the way as to, okay, go on to the next step. This is great, here you are. Super, super easy. And not only after you fund your account, which takes 3 minutes, and you create it, you get a nice email saying thank you and some pleasant information about where you can move forward. Aspiration itself, and this is cool because you can't do this with JP Morgan Chase, I promise you, or Wells Fargo, or Bank of America, or Citigroup. You cannot actually take your money and then very easily click onto having it invest in a fund that is actually socially responsible. So there are ESG funds. You can actually finance a fund for yourself, invest in it, take a piece of your $500 or $100 or $1,000 or $10 account and move it into an investment for the long term, for the planet, in the Aspiration window. It's super easy. You can't do this on the main websites of main banks because they don't want you to. They don't actually want you to open an account and move your own money into places that it will actually benefit you. That's not what they want to do unless they're taking a fee. Aspiration doesn't necessarily take a fee for that. Aspiration allows you to basically move your money into places where it can do the most good in the quickest amount of time for the cheapest amount of cost to you, and it doesn't pay you like 12 cents on the dollar to have it in their savings account. It pays $2, right? It has a 2% APY, it has a 2% annual interest rate. So right away, if you do literally nothing with your money, you get more money for having it, staying with something like, staying in an Aspiration account than having it in JP Morgan Chase. So like right away, you can make more money not knowing anything but taking 3 minutes to set up that account. And then you can invest it in better places, and you can also donate it to charities. They have this whole cool screen, you guys should take a look at it, where you can actually choose as well to donate to charities. So you can literally do everything online, on a train, in a few minutes, and make a difference for yourself, your personal finances, which is important. I mean, we need to pay off those debts, unfortunately, that have been bestowed upon us by this unequal system, and also to do something that's very easy in terms of managing your finances for the good of the planet, for the good of yourself. So seriously, if you can do it actually in less time, than 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Do we have somebody who's going to like do something for that? Like, can we? If somebody can prove that to us,
we're waiting to hit the thresholds for you.
We've got that. Punch that. Like, but add this. Like, if someone can actually time themselves to open an account in less than 2 minutes and 58 seconds, please let us know right now. Do what I did. Take your phone, do a stopwatch, open the account, take a selfie, close your activity, have your account, and let us know. And honestly, you will do better financially. You will do better from the standpoint of managing your own money, and you will actually be helping to take money away from Jamie Dimon, who I viscerally. Can I say hate? I hate that guy.
Yes, you can.
Hate that guy. Hate him. Okay.
I think without speaking to Aspiration in particular, I would say that we do have to be careful within the kinds of changes we're seeing in the financial and the banking system and the personal finance system. The craziest thing that happened this week, of course, was Facebook deciding to announce that they are creating their own currency. That is, and a digital wallet for it, a bank that offers 0 interest, actually. You put your money in that wallet and they don't give you anything but the convenience of being able to move that money a little faster than the current system. And it is not a national currency based, it's backed by a reserve, its own sort of internal Federal Reserve. And it's backed by a global basket of currencies, which means that this is something for all 2 billion of its users, and it can be used to, fly money from one place to another and deprive emerging markets or other central banks from actually having control over their own money supply. So. Is the value judgment between Jamie Dimon and Mark Zuckerberg, is there something better or worse in there? I'm not sure. So we need to be careful about thinking about ways to democratize this. And the public bank is a perfect example of how you can do that. Another example is empowering the Postal Service to create bank accounts that for a personal level everyone can access. That's something that is democratically controlled rather than controlled by oligarchs and controlled by people with other designs. Because of course, what Facebook wants to do is just keep you on Facebook so that all your payments and everything is being done in that one place, so they can sell you more ads. So I think we have to think about what's important here, and what's important is empowering local communities, empowering local finance, and having it be democratically governed.
And public banks can work synergistically with smaller banks, local banks, community banks, credit unions, socially responsible banks. By our local public banking model is based after the Bank of North Dakota model, which partners with local banks. So it extends their credit line, creates new lending opportunities, and ultimately bolsters the economy. When you look at California, within the last 25 years, we've lost 75% of our local banks. And that, with the loss of the banks, you then kill off the small and medium-sized businesses that depend on those banks, and then you kill off the local economy that depends on those small businesses.
And this is crucially important. The North Dakota is the one state that did not have a single community bank fail during the financial crisis. It has created record profits, the Bank of North Dakota, 15 years in a row. And those profits have been cycled back into the state of North Dakota, into their public treasury, to be used for more lending and more public services. I encourage people to look at that model. BND.gov, is that what it is?
And the Wall Street Journal states Bank of North Dakota is more profitable than Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase.
And JP Morgan.
18% return on investment.
That's right.
Yes, and actually in the wake of the financial crisis, and this is kind of key too, because I hate Jamie Dimon, but JP Morgan actually performed far, far worse in the wake of the financial crisis, after being subsidized by the Federal Reserve, after being given a bailout by effectively us through sort of political maneuverings on Washington, and still do not perform as well as the public bank. And I just want to bring that back for a second, because again, the part of the public banking idea North Dakota as it currently exists, what we could have in general as a public banking movement and throughout cities and communities and states in the country speaks to something about individual empowerment as well, as does deciding where your money goes and taking it away from institutions who are speculating in a lot of derivatives that JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, all of these institutions bet money away from actual people because it's far easier. This is the thing. It's far easier to click something on a trading desk and invest in a currency in like Malaysia than to potentially fund a local development project or to fund a clean energy project or to fund an anti-fossil fuel project because that's just not as easy. So if we have ways where we can actually take that money back, take the money that we are providing. There is a reason these institutions, top 6 banks in this country, have so much ownership of our deposits and our assets because they had that power for so long. If we can take that back and readdress it into places where we control it and we make money from that as well, we're doing good for ourselves, we're doing good for the planet, we're doing good for each other, we're doing good for the future. You're still nodding.
I love it. I mean, look, it speaks to this issue. You mentioned individual empowerment. I mean, that's really where we have to go. We have to go as, I was saying previously, I was saying we as the people that basically are the basis for this pyramid of power that's been created. It's human beings that are the base of that. And at some level, there's much human slavery that still exists in the world. Then there's other levels of debt slavery that is even more massive than the actual physical human slavery going on. But this is a pyramid of power that's built on the backs of real human beings. And the more anything we can do to empower the human being to realize, wait a minute, this country, we are the assets. This country runs on us. And actually like completely shift the way that we see the world. It's not about, oh, you're born in sin, this whole Catholic Church imposed philosophy that governments picked up on, you're born in debt. That's not true. Every human being is an asset to this planet because of what the creativity, the work that we're gonna put in the course of our lives. Basically we're here from the perspective of government. It's like, oh, you're here as taxpayers, so great. And all those, we can basically project onto you how much you're gonna be able to, to contribute or not to this economy. And that's all backwards because really it's the human creativity that we have to foster and the ingenuity that we've seen. That's what creates economies and markets. It's not natural resources. It's resources that we humans impart and say, wait a minute, we actually can use oil and now we can go to hydrogen, then we can go to fusion
we
and we can
choose what
evolve.
We need to do.
Exactly.
This is fascinating. We have basically expired our time here for this particular panel, but I just want to say thank you so much for all of your contributions, your ongoing contributions to shifting the financial power away from where it's currently centered to our actual hands. And again, if anyone has done less than 2 minutes and 58 seconds in terms of opening their own account, you too can both get more on your savings and you can use your money to invest and direct into areas that are actually going to help everyone. And also, if public banks, if community banks, if socially responsible banks like Aspiration continue to accumulate these funds, they can start to lend things out at cheaper interest rates than what we are paying, which is now all-time high interest rates, while banks get their money so cheaply on the big, powerful banking side. So in a way, we can also direct how lending happens and how our investment money comes back to us and to the climate, to potentially good climate environment and socially responsible methods. So I want to thank you guys. The bill. Sorry, we need. Okay, one more thing. We need to do one more important thing because this stuff actually works. Speaking with ourselves, our activism, and our money actually works. And you just had a fantastic victory.
Really quickly, California is on the verge of a financial revolution. A bill, AB 857, Assembly Bill 857, it's a grassroots initiative. It's called the Public Banking Act, and it's now made its way through the state assembly. And we got voted through the Senate Banking Committee. So we're a few steps away from California becoming the very first state in the nation to enable cities and counties to create public banks. At every step of the way, our grassroots movement have met well-funded lobbyists trying to kill this bill, but we fought through. It's been a very highly coordinated campaign with a grassroots network of activists representing 10 cities in California who are now standing up as California, the 5th largest economy in the world, against Wall Street to take our financial power back and put it in the hands of the people.
So take it back. put it in our hands. That's an amazing victory. We need to keep going with that.
Call your
and
senators.
also call your senators. Set up your own account with Aspiration. Set up your account away from the larger institutions where you can actually have your money work for you and for our global community. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so
you.
much.